a long time ago, or the year 2008 to be exact, Star Wars made its theatrical return, not with a live-action epic, but with this. Critics called it a 90-minute toy commercial, fans called it the first real Star Wars flop. It wasn't pretty. But then, something unexpected happened. The series that followed, Star Wars The Clone Wars, became one of the most beloved, ambitious, and emotionally rich shows in the entire franchise. Some even argue it may be the best series to come from this IP. The correct answer is Andor, so today, I wanted to look back at the movie that started it all. The beginning of one of Star Wars' greatest success stories. This is Star Wars The Clone Wars movie. Taking place between Episode 2 Attack of the Clones and Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, in the thick of the galactic-sized conflict between the Republic and the Separatists, the film follows Anakin Skywalker and his new Padawan Ahsoka Tano, even though he isn't the
rank of Master. What?
As they're sent on a mission to rescue Jabba the Hutt's son Rotta, unaware that he has been kidnapped by Count Dooku's assassin Asajj Ventress. It's a race against time, as whichever side brings him back will secure a potential alliance with the Hutts. Right off the bat, one of the main issues in regards to the story is just how it throws you into the movie without much context. It doesn't explain the conflict between the Republic and the Separatists. Granted, the other Star Wars films thrust you into their plots too, but they at least have the opening title crawls that allows you to catch up fairly easily. But with the Clone Wars movie, we have a fast-paced montage with narration by Tom Kane that can be somewhat jarring for first-time viewers. The movie was directed by Dave Filoni, whilst George Lucas was the executive producer. By the mid-2000s, Lucas had completed his work on the Star Wars prequels, but he wasn't done with the franchise just yet. He wanted to explore concepts and characters that the trilogy only hinted at: the politics of a galaxy at war, the morally grey zones in conflict, the perspective of the clones, the failings of the Jedi Order. So Lucas teamed up with Dave Filoni, who at the time was a young animation director who was mostly known for his work on Season 1 of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Together, they began building a 3D animated show about the Clone Wars itself.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
Late into production, when George Lucas saw some of the early footage, he had this rather mad idea to just take the first 4 episodes and stitch them together into one film for a theatrical release, with rather negative results.
Before the dark times.
And trust me when I say that this decision will be the main point I'll be harping on when addressing the film's problems, because it's unsurprising how much it affected the whole project. What should have been a mere 4-part TV pilot was now expected to compete with the likes of big blockbuster movies such as The Dark Knight and Iron Man. It really didn't stand a chance, but it wasn't all doom and gloom to an extent. With a small budget of $8.5 million, it did manage to make almost $70 million at the box office, despite the rather unfavourable reviews. And it did generate some interest from the fans for its follow-up series, so I guess in hindsight, it was either a really smart or really insane idea, or both, that somewhat achieved the results that they intended. For this video, I will try to be open-minded and fair when it comes to criticising this film. Let's talk about the animation. Man, it is so strange going back to this after being spoiled by the later seasons as well as shows like The Bad Batch and the various Tales of shows they've made recently. It seems really unfair to even think about comparing the movie's animation with everything that has come out since. Obviously, as the first CG animated show that Lucasfilm made, it's going to have signs of aging poorly. The characters move and emote kind of like weird puppets, which I remember being a common criticism back then. But that's not to say that there isn't any talent being shown throughout it, there clearly is. If you keep in mind that this was meant to be a TV pilot with a much smaller budget compared to other animated films from that year like WALL-E or Kung Fu Panda, I do think it looks decent for a series. I really like the bright colours, the painted textures, the variety of camera angles, and the really distinct character designs. For the most part, Dooku still looks really weird to me. They were clearly inspired by the work of Genndy Tartakovsky in his own version of the Clone Wars that came out 5 years prior. It's so interesting how, despite being non-canon, the art style of that show would basically become the Clone Wars art style for most of their animation projects going forward. You can tell that they were struggling to find their footing with the animation, but something I have noticed is that they managed to find a way to work with their limitations. I personally think this is a well storyboarded film. They make up for their limited skills with the character work through some interesting angles, camera movements, and shadow work that help convey the tone and emotions of each scene. Where I think the animation truly shines is in the action sequences. I'm not just talking about all the elements I just mentioned. I really enjoy a lot of these scenarios. We get to see full-scale battles like on Christophsis, where Anakin and several clones jump down to take out the giant tri-droids in the back, whilst Obi-Wan and his troops keep the main army occupied from the front lines. We have some decently choreographed lightsaber duels with the likes of Asajj, Ventress, and Count Dooku, and in my opinion, the highlight action set piece is when Anakin, Ahsoka, and the 501st are scaling this cliff on the planet Teth. Not only do we rarely get battles like this in Star Wars, where the perpetual threat of gravity is added on top of everything, but I love that Anakin and Ahsoka turn it into a game. It makes it more entertaining, minus the droid humour, which I'll get to later. It shows character through the action. We see how both of them operate and how they resolve situations in different ways. Kinda reminds me of Legolas and Gimli trying to outcompete each other in the Lord of the Rings films.
I have no pointy ear outscoring me!
Anakin charges upwards with a reckless confidence that we're accustomed to, whilst Ahsoka follows with a mix of enthusiasm and determination, eager to prove that she belongs at his side. She mirrors his boldness, yet also adds her own flair. She improvises when things go wrong, showing that she is adaptable. This is probably the best example in the movie of story and character being expressed through the action itself. The animators already demonstrated a level of talent at this point. Thankfully, by the time they reached Season 3, their efforts paid off due to a mix of time, dedication, and a bigger budget from Lucas's own pockets. Now for the characters. One thing I should just be honest about right off the bat is I'm not really a big fan of the characters in the prequels. Now before you come at me in the comments, I'm only bringing this up to emphasize how much I like them so much better in the Clone Wars movie and in the series. For the film specifically, they're not exactly the most layered or complex version of themselves, but at the very least, I think the bare essentials of who they're supposed to be at this point in the timeline are decently portrayed. Anakin is impulsive, bold, and confident to the extent of being reckless. Despite this, I actually find myself more invested in this version than I did with Hayden Christensen's version. I think a big part of it is due to the voice acting, which is overall pretty good, especially for a TV pilot. Matt Lanter does capture the spirit of Hayden without necessarily copying his delivery. He adds his own energy to the performance, yet it still feels in character. I don't know, when I hear him make a joke or a complaint, I strangely buy it more here than in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Another thing I enjoy is how he is challenged in the film and for the rest of the series, and it all comes down with the simple addition of giving him a Padawan of his own. Though I will admit, I'm still not 100% sure to this day how this works since he's a master here, but he's denied that title in Revenge of the Sith, blah 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 blah. I'll just keep my focus on the film. Ahsoka's role challenges Anakin as he is essentially getting a taste of his own medicine. He has to deal with a character that mirrors a lot of the same types of choices and decisions he would have made before being appointed as her master. Even in this movie, you already start to see Anakin begin to mellow down, become more caring and responsible. And though it's not fully developed, I can really start to see that change. And speaking of which, I may as well now talk about Ahsoka Tano, definitely the character I really want to talk about the most. Man, has she gone through quite the hero's journey, and I'm not merely talking about within the franchise, I'm talking about the fan reaction. For you younglings that don't know or remember, there was a huge backlash against Ahsoka when she made her debut in this movie. It wasn't quite to the level of Jar Jar Binks, but it was still quite overblown if you ask me. And if you don't believe that, because harassment and revisionism seems to be a favourite pastime for some fans, maybe you should let her voice actress Ashley Eckstein speak for herself.
I definitely had to deal with my fair share of hate and negative comments and definitely cyberbullying when Ahsoka first came out. I remember at first I was crushed because I had to keep the secret for 2 years. Literally, I recorded the voice of Ahsoka for 2 years before it came out. And then it comes out and everyone hates her.
But then, something magical happened. People began to enjoy her character thanks to a combination of time, patience, writing, and development. It's no question that Ahsoka evolved into a fan favourite. I think Dave Filoni said it best.
She earned her credibility. She had to fight for it with the fans.
It's so interesting to see how far she has come, to the point where she is now appearing in live action shows. That's still so surreal to me. Now with the history lesson out of the way, what do I think of Ahsoka? I never got the hate.
What?
In fact, she's my favourite character in the film. Now this is far from her best role or even best writing, especially compared to the later seasons of Clone Wars, but I think this is a surprisingly solid start to her story. I mentioned before how her role challenges Anakin, but I think she's more than just a mere cardboard copy of him. She's completely her own character. She's headstrong, determined, playful, and snarky. But beneath all that is a seriously tenacious Padawan that's quick on her feet and adaptable in whatever situation she's in. I also really love her fighting style with the reverse grip. It's quite unique. Though everybody did compare her to Starkiller from the Force Unleashed games, I never really got into them, so I have no opinion. In many ways, despite her age, Ahsoka does seem to embody many of the values and teachings of the Jedi, such as compassion, courage, selflessness, and even some sense of discipline. These are all present in the film, but they get heavily expanded on in the later series, turning Ahsoka from my favourite character in the movie to possibly my favourite character in the whole franchise. Honestly, the rest of the characters are each pretty easy to summarise, so I'll do a bit of a lightning round. Obi-Wan is the calm centre between Anakin's impulsiveness and Ahsoka's eagerness. He maintains his sense of patience, diplomacy, and of course his humour. He primarily serves as Anakin and Ahsoka's backup throughout the movie. Captain Rex is essentially the ideal clone trooper, disciplined, loyal, and sharp, yet already well respected by both his brothers and Jedi generals. All this becomes integral throughout the show as he develops into one of the best characters in the Clone Wars. Yoda, despite being shown in all the marketing, is barely in the movie, though they still display his sense of wisdom and compassion. Asajj Ventress, our main antagonist and foil to our heroes, she's cool, cunning, and confident, and serves Count Dooku with undying loyalty. There is something interesting about how this is technically her first on-screen canonical appearance, even though a lot of people first saw her in the microseries. But what makes it funny is how that show isn't even canon and Ventress appears in this movie without any context whatsoever. They hint at a history between her, Anakin, and Obi-Wan, but it's never really explained. Her master, Count Dooku, is the real mastermind behind the abduction of Jabba's son. He spends most of the film plotting far away from the front lines, manipulating those around him to further his plans. Both Jabba and his son Rotta, who I can't believe we're going to see in live action, that's fucking insane to me, are right at the centre of the plot. They both represent how desperate both the Republic and Separatists are to win favour within neutral territory. Padmé is brought in fairly late into the story in a small yet significant role. She has a subplot that involves her negotiating with Jabba the Hutt's uncle Ziro, who resides on Coruscant. Though brief, we do see how brave, ideal, and diplomatic she can be. Then we have Ziro himself. God, I forgot how much I hate this guy. I don't know why they decided to give him such a whiny sounding voice despite being portrayed by a very talented voice actor, Corey Burton.
What is that?
Thank God his role is so minimal, and thank you Lucasfilm for killing him off fairly quickly in the show. Not something I thought I would ever say. Overall, the movie may not give us the most complex version of these characters, but it does lay the groundwork for what the series would later perfect. You can already see the start of their personalities, relationships, and potential, enough to set the stage for what's to come. I think what really helps the characters and dialogue is the incredibly talented voice cast that they brought in. Only a handful of actors from the main saga returned to reprise their roles. Firstly, Samuel Jackson as Mace Windu. His role is so minor that it feels somewhat pointless. He would later be replaced by T.C. Carson. Anthony Daniels returns as Golden Balls himself. He only comes into play during Padmé's subplot. Again, he's not entirely needed. The only actor of any real worth is Christopher Lee as Count Dooku. This would sadly be the last time he ever played the character. There is something rather surreal about hearing his voice coming out of Dooku whilst he interacts with the likes of Ventress or Anakin. Corey Burton would later portray Dooku in all other projects. If you really want to hear him at his best, watch Tales of the Jedi. He is amazing in that miniseries. Everyone else was replaced by some of my favourite voice actors. I already mentioned Matt Lanter and Ashley Eckstein, and whilst they're pretty good, you can sense that they're trying to find their footing. They do significantly improve with each season. We have actors like James Arnold Taylor as Obi-Wan, Tom Kane as Yoda, D. Bradley Baker as all the clones, Nika Futterman as Ventress, Catherine Tabor as Padmé, and Matthew Wood as the battle droids.
What happened to the shield?
Hang on, I'll get to that. The cast all provide an energy and flair that really bring these characters to life. They are a huge reason for their personalities working as well as they do. One thing that surprisingly doesn't get talked about is the film's humour. When it comes to my own personal Star Wars preferences, I do tend to like the more light-hearted stuff that isn't afraid to add some comedy. I'll get the worst out of the way. The battle droids are fucking annoying. Like with Ziro, I forgot how much I disliked their shenanigans upon rewatch. Some people have claimed that the series was always dark and mature. Yes, they do exist. To them I say, try to explain this.
What if it's one of ours? Shut up, Sergeant. I'm in command here. No, not that one. Yeah. That'll work. Oh my god! Get back here, Sergeant!
I mean, some of it can be so stupid that it makes me chuckle, though it mostly involves a character like Ventress killing them. Thank heavens that they toned it down big time in the later seasons. I do enjoy the rest of the humour, mostly whenever it's character related. I think a lot of it comes from catharsis at seeing Anakin's reactions, from Obi-Wan's all-knowing smirks to Ahsoka not doing as she's told. It's literally him being handed a mirror. Obi-Wan also has some pretty funny moments where he's interacting with characters like Ventress or Loathsome. Whether he's deliberately stalling or openly flirting during a duel, those were definitely some of the comedic highlights. I've mentioned multiple times that the decision to make a 4-part TV pilot into a movie is the film's biggest problem. I should probably rephrase that to, it's the main cause of the film's problems. I've addressed things like the humour not always working, awkward animation, and some characters lacking depth. Those are mostly nitpicks since they're things I can deal with. However, the biggest problem is both the film's structure and flow. This isn't a particularly long film at about roughly 90 minutes, the shortest of any of the theatrical Star Wars films. And yet it's possibly the worst paced out of all of them. Despite having a plot inspired by a 1989 movie Shogun Shadow, the film does take approximately an entire episode's length to get the main story going. You can practically see where each episode ends and the next one begins. And since this is initially written as a 4-part pilot, each episode has its own 3-act structure, a beginning, rising action, and a resolution. So in watching the film, I feel like it has 4 separate climaxes: the Battle of Christophsis, the Battle of Teth, the duel with Ventress, and the final fight with Dooku in the Magna Guards. And because of how much they cram into the film, it feels like you're running 4 laps instead of just 1. It can get rather exhausting with hardly any time to breathe. There's even one very specific word I've constantly heard being used to describe the movie, even by notable Star Wars content creators: boring. Whilst I wouldn't personally go that far, and this is coming from someone who really draws the line at boring, I do think it is clear that the film's biggest failure is being unable to convey the feel of a feature-length motion picture. It's the simple fact that this was never built to function as a film. The pacing, flow, and repeated climaxes all stem from that TV episode DNA, and the result is a story that struggles to feel cohesive. Ironically, many of the arcs of the later seasons would feel way more cinematic, structured, and could work as movies. The Maul arc and finale of Season 5 spring to mind, and especially the final arc of Season 7, The Siege of Mandalore. The movie is not entirely unwatchable, but it never quite escapes the limits of its original format. The main reason I wanted to rewatch this film after all these years is to see where the show started, what were its strengths and weaknesses, and what lessons were learned from this specific entry. You can see Filoni and his team experimenting, trying to figure out tone, character chemistry, and that mythic serial style that Lucas always loved. I'm not a fan of prequels in general, as we already know the outcome, but something I've grown to appreciate with time is how they can work. This is an example where the knowledge of what will inevitably happen does in fact add to the drama. Take the Anakin-Ahsoka dynamic for instance. Though awkward at first, it does work. There's a warmth to it that hints at the mentorship and tragedy to come. Anakin starts the film seeing Ahsoka as an unwanted responsibility, but by the end, he sees her as a true apprentice, someone he respects, trusts, and is beginning to care about. Something that certainly gets challenged much later on in the timeline. Even the animation, as stiff as it looks now, was laying the foundation for the show's visual identity. The angular faces, the painted textures, the samurai-inspired choreography. All of which they would perfect with each passing season to the point where it's so hard to believe how far they've come. Even the Jabba the Hutt part of the plot, though he seems to remain neutral in the show because I can't remember if they ever bring up his alliance with the Republic, please let me know if I'm wrong in the comments, does already hint at the moral ambiguity that gets addressed in the series. That the war itself isn't as black and white as it seems. This isn't just good versus evil, light versus dark. There is so much that gets questioned. What is right? What is wrong? Ahsoka especially becomes the vessel that we follow as we learn about the complications and dilemmas that are addressed throughout the show. The movie's lighter tone would eventually give way to deep tragedy, politics, and even existential questions about free will. It's like watching an artist's first piece. It may be unpolished, but you can tell they were onto something, and it would later pay off big time. Watching the film today, what do I think of it? It's complicated, yet in the best way. The Clone Wars movie is not a great film by any means, not even really a good one, but it's a fascinating one. I never got behind the initial hate upon release, and I still don't feel that way at all today. It's certainly a guilty pleasure at best, because beneath the awkward pacing, stitched together structure, and the uneven animation, you can clearly see the beginnings of something special. The movie hints at everything the series would later excel at: stronger character arcs, deeper political storytelling, emotional nuance, and a genuine beating heart. Yes, it stumbles, but always in the direction of what the show would eventually perfect. And its biggest legacy is simple. It planted the seeds: a better Anakin, a deeper Clone War, the introduction of Ahsoka Tano, who would go on to become one of the franchise's most beloved characters. So no, the movie isn't a triumph on its own, but it is the start of one. And for that alone, it deserves more credit than it ever got.